Hello and welcome to the Cultural Stew podcast. My name is Ron Herkins Jr. and I am here with episode 2 of what we like to call Moments of Influence. And today I have a special guest and his name is Kraig Connor.
Hey everyone.
Kraig, tell us a little about yourself and who you are.
Kraig Connor. Grew up in Greece, New York. Live in Gates currently. I'm 28, so going to be 29 soon. Went to college at CUCA, so I've stayed pretty local my whole life.
I met Kraig through running, and he's pretty big in the running scene here. So you often, if you're in Rochester area, you can see him blazing down the roads or in some sort of event capacity. When I put out the call for this Moments of Influence piece, I really opened it up to pretty much anything, and that goes from like films to music to books. And I admittedly I'm not a huge book reader. I'm more of a book listener, and that is primarily because of the way I interact with my films. I kind of like to read the books after I view a film, and pretty much anything these days can be made into a film. So I kind of let things situate before I read them. So you brought up the book Anthem by Ayn Rand. Is that the correct way of pronunciation?
Yeah, I guess so. I've always called her Anne. I don't know.
I always thought it was Anne until I was listening to another podcast this last week, and all I kept was hearing Ayn. I'm like, have I been saying it wrong the whole time?
It's close enough, I guess.
What can you tell me about Ayn Rand? I mean, I know she's born in the...
Yeah, I guess she was born in communist Russia and then moved here in early 20s, maybe a little bit before, and despised communist Russia. And, you know, that's pretty much where all her political leanings are, like anti-communism and whatnot. Some people really don't like her, think that she was a hypocritical, wench, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and she came up during the time in the world where, we're going through World War II and then coming into 50s America. And, it's not I wouldn't even say now is a great time to be a woman in America. I mean, I can only imagine what it was like in the 50s when a female writer came out and had these strong views that she had. So you pulled out Anthem, a book I was unfamiliar with. I've only been familiar with the Atlas Shrugged series, and that was due to there was a series on, I think it came on Netflix. So I watched that and went back and read the books. So Anthem is her shortest book, you say?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's her shortest one. I've read a few short papers by her.
And it was written in 1937 and published in 1938. So very much influenced by what happened in Russia and what she was seeing in there. So tell me a little about the book.
So I first read the book in 10th grade AP English class, and I wasn't much of a reader back then, and for some reason this book just kind of stuck out, probably because it was so short and all the other books were really long and I didn't really care, and I was just trying to get through class. But I really liked the book because it got to the individual part where his name is Equality with a whole bunch of numbers.
Equality 72521.
Right, yeah, and it's basically Prometheus. So it's pretty important. And then basically he goes from being a collective individual, just a number, just a random cog in the machine, to having his own free will and his own mind, and he breaks away from pretty much prison, breaks away from communism is basically the moral of the story.
So, yeah, you've got that main character, Equality 72521.
Yes.
So the whole story just basically focuses on him. And it was interesting because I read it and then I listened to it as an audio book just to kind of get the different perspective, because I always get a different perspective with somebody actually like reading it. And that number just being said over and over and over again really stripped away that individualism, like in a really interesting way that I didn't expect to happen. And as you pointed out, he becomes Prometheus, and he, who's it, the golden one?
Yeah, basically his girlfriend or woman that he falls in love with. But, in communist Russia, they really frowned upon love and individualism. So they were like basically saying, this is who you're going to be, this is who you're going to love, this is what you're going to do. And Prometheus didn't want to be a part of that. And, so he thought on his own and he left.
So your first experience, like you said, you read this probably when you were in...
Yeah, I was in 10th grade.
10th grade.
Yeah, I remember reading it in class and just, I didn't pay attention to the rest of the lecture. And I read it, and teacher was Mrs. Mauer, Patricia Mauer. She's a great, sweet old lady. She did not have the political leanings of this book, and she did not like it. But she figured it was short and it was easy to read for most students. And I just remember falling in love with the book and falling in love with the philosophy. For whatever reason, it just kind of stuck to me. And then I started reading all of the Rand other books.
So digging into that philosophy a little bit, what are some of the key things that kind of stuck out to you that you're like, you mentioned to me that you read this at least
once a year. I try to at least Anthem once a year. Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged take a little bit longer, a few thousand pages worth of reading. The philosophy is more about yourself. I really think strongly of me before anyone else. Not that that's being selfish, but at the long run, I think you should look after yourself. You help others when you can and when you're afforded to, but kind of keep a low profile and keep on moving along.
Now, me with this only being my first time through it. I'm not even going to touch on the Soviet Russia thing, but when you look at it from the view of where we are and how everybody wants to put everybody in their own little cubes, like say, oh, no, you belong here, you belong here, you belong here. That came through in the book. And here's a book that's nearing pretty close to almost being 100 years old. And she's talking about a society that's basically been stripped down and everybody's living in these distinct things. You have this, you're a janitor, street sweeper, that's what you do. You have this, you're a plantation farmer, that's what you do. And there's no way that they can break out of those. And they even go into the subset of what the prison is like, he can break out of it because everybody is expected to do exactly the same thing and nobody's thought up out of that and the norm. And when you look at today's media and the news and the stuff that's happening today, you can see that to a degree. We all kind of, and I'll say even myself sometimes, is we kind of fall in line with what somebody else is saying. And to have an original thought or have something that is uniquely ours and stand out and be important, I think that came across as the most important thing to me. You can draw the direct comparisons to the way communist Russia is, but I think there's direct comparisons to the way life is now. And even in the way of having that individual voice, that's what it was to me. Was this book was him coming to the point where he's like, I can think for myself. I can do things for myself. I can have my own life. I don't have to be what everybody in the world is saying I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, and then that's most of her philosophy in general, and most of all of her characters in all the other books. In Fountainhead, Howard Rourke, and Atlas Shrugged, Dangy Taggart. There, it's hey, just because people are doing it this way doesn't mean you have to follow suit. You can think for yourself at some point. Don't be afraid to, and sometimes taking those risks are beneficial.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to rub against the grain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I've done that a couple times in my life, and sometimes that hasn't worked out good. But at the end of the day, you feel good about the choices you've made. How would you sell it to somebody? Telling them for the first time to read it?
I think depends on if they're into philosophy and political philosophy, I guess. I would try to sell this saying, maybe you should expand your horizons and maybe not just think that there's two sets of political philosophies or three. Sometimes people get caught up with what's going on currently, other than looking back in the past. So I would say it's a quick, short read, and if they're interested, it's it's a different philosophy, a different take on life, I guess. So, I don't know. It's hard for me to describe of how I would sell it to somebody because I've read it so many times, and it's just like I get that it's a very hot topic name. Ayn Rand is not everyone's favorite for whatever reason because they've already gone in with a preconceived notion. So I'm like, maybe you should just give it a shot.
Yeah, I'm in contrast to the other things that she's written. It definitely stands apart to me.
Yeah,
and I don't know, maybe it's because of that. It was such a condensed, short version that some of her long, eloquent descriptions and things that just seem to go on for pages are just condensed.
Yeah, she didn't have as much time to get probably everything she wanted to say all out. Sometimes those other books, Anthem, or Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead, were a little run-on at points where you're like, all right, let's get to the point here. But it really got to the point, hit home. Start thinking for yourself at some point,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a very important thing, especially in this political culture that is becoming a little bit more prevalent. I spent the first 35, 36 years of my life completely ignoring politics as much as I can, and now I seem like I've come to the point where I can't ignore it anymore. And but I think in becoming part of the conversation, figuring out what it is, what the exact message is that you want to deliver, and yeah, it is more than just the two political parties. It's more than three political parties because every party has something in it that is for the betterment of mankind in general. Yeah. But unfortunately, we're coined into this little pen here that we need to make a decision as to what's the right way to go.
Yeah, yeah. I liked studying the different philosophies. Anne's philosophies here. Objectivism is what her philosophy is called. So, obviously, if you want to read into that, there's books on objectivism. It is a little wishy-washy at points, but it's something different. Take a look.
How have you tried to apply what you've learned from this book in your own life?
This book, I try to have a pretty open mind about most things. I read all types of different sides on political issues, non-political issues, sporting issues, anything pretty much. And then I just try to formulate my own opinion on it once I've gathered the facts. And I've learned from this book, I've learned to take a little bit risks and kind of just look out for myself, and do what I think is right for me and my family rather than what might be good for, my neighbor.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I do have another question for you. I see you frequently throwing on the records.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
You are a old LP fan.
Yes.
What are some of your favorites that you've been listening to lately?
Lately, I've been listening to a lot of Jeff Beck. I don't know why, but just the way that he plays that guitar and listening to it on vinyl, listening to that old scratch is kind of funky, kind of groovy. So, yeah,
I was in the store the other day and I was like, oh man, I think I should get one because we just moved, so we've been cleaning out stuff and we came across like 2 big boxes full of LPs and the Beatles are in there, and I was like, it might be worth it just to get a LP player again just for that. But
yeah, but it turns into a very expensive hobby real quick, so.
The kicker for me was as we went through the store, I'm like, okay, if I can find this disc, then maybe I'll get it. I was looking for any of the White Stripes or Jack White stuff, and there was none in there. So I'm like, oh, I'm not getting an LP player today.
Yeah. I typically search through all like the dollar bins and whatnot. Sometimes there's some pretty good treasures in there. So
awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kraig, for coming on the show. Is there anywhere we can find you or follow you on social media?
Yeah, it's kind of cheesy. On Twitter, I'm Kraig Runs. On Instagram, it's the same. So,
Kraig Runs with a K.
Yeah, Kraig Runs with a K.
Kraig Runs with a K. And you can find me pretty much anywhere as at GF Media or GF Media CEO. You can find us at culturalstew.net and at culturalstewnet on Twitter and Cultural Stew on Facebook. Thank you very much and catch you at the next one. you've liked what you've heard, please consider sponsoring us on Patreon. Patreon is a creator support system that allows people to support the things they love and creators to continue doing what they love. Head on over to patreon.com/gfmedia and choose the Cultural Stew podcast levels to show your support for us. Thank you.